These are type of like black swan events. You don't know that they're going to happen. If one of these things were to happen, you'd get a little bit of a hit in the copper price. But when all of these things start to happen, it's a really good opportunity. I mean, if you're going to be a trader or an investor in the copper space, this is a really interesting time.
Today's guest is a supporting sponsor of Liberty in Finance. Welcome back to Liberty in Finance. I'm delighted to have a returning guest to introduce to you again today. Teo Dechev is the president and CEO of Mundoro, a company that specializes in copper and also other metals. Teo, thank you for coming back on Liberty in Finance.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to start the conversation.
Most of our viewers have probably met you here before because Mundoro has been guests on our channel, partly because of our being introduced through the Rule Symposium on Natural Resources Investing in Boca Raton, Florida, the last couple of years. But we've had so much growth of our viewers and subscribers that we've got a lot of newbies here for whom this will be the first time hearing about Mundoro. So I'm going to have to ask some company-specific questions near the end to just wrap that part in. But first of all, if you could kick us off with an understanding of what you see going on right now in the copper market. And I'll preface that by saying that our viewers and subscribers are keenly intent on the precious metals markets, gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. And they understand, for example, that silver is often mined not as a primary metal, but as a byproduct of other mining, such as copper. And they've also listened to Rick Rule, who is a frequent guest on our channel, talking about the base metals such as copper and what he and others have referred to as a massive metals shortage coming between the never-ending demand for copper and yet the lagging investment in exploration, development, and production. So bring us up to date. It's been several months since we've had you on. Bring us up to date on what your view is of the current copper market and perhaps focusing at least part of that on the supply and demand aspects.
Absolutely. Well, you've asked a lot. There is a lot going on in that question. You touched upon the exploration markets. Let's talk about that a little bit. Interestingly, when you look at the figures for copper expenditures in exploration, we're kind of starting to reapproach those levels that we were at back in the early 2010s. So 2010 to 2015. From there, we kind of dropped off the map. And here we are, 2025, 10 years later, and we're just starting to get expenditures to the levels that they were in the past for exploration. So what does that tell you? First of all, we've been investing in copper exploration.
You mean the industry as a whole? The
industry as a whole. So when I say we, I'm talking about the industry. And there's probably a few factors behind that, but fundamentally, when you kind of decrease investment in an entire sector for 10 years, you're going to get a crunch. And so you're feeling a little bit of that. You've got supply constraint pressure. And then on top of that, you've got this dearth of opportunities that, barely exist simply because there's been so little investment. So if you were in an environment where people had been spending a lot on exploration and there was supply constraints, then there would be better visibility on where that next big project would come from. But because you have both things happening at the same time, it's caused a lot of volatility in the copper price. So that's kind of one really important factor to remember. So what does that mean for shareholders? You should definitely be keeping an eye out on copper exploration stories, because the ones that have great results and have really strong potential are going to most likely outperform the majority of their peers. So that's one kind of way to look at the market. The other side is, well, what exactly is supply constraint, and why do we have supply constraint, and what does that actually mean for copper consumption? Particularly in the US, because I'm sure a lot of your viewers are in the United States. So the United States has done this really interesting thing where they've incorporated tariffs on copper supply coming in, which is kind of counterintuitive because the United States wants to build out all of these data centers. So they want to create and they want to have electrification and they want to do all these things with AI, and yet they're kind of putting a little bit of a throttle on how they get on that roadmap. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. That's caused a differential in the copper price within the United States. And I think everybody saw that when the LME exchange price versus the Shanghai price versus the COMEX price, which is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So that was a really interesting dynamic. But fundamentally, and these are type of like black swan events. You don't know that they're going to happen. So Grasberg in the Philippines has a giant mudslide. That happened just a few weeks ago. Supply goes down. There was an earthquake in the Congo, which affected Ivanhoe Mines, the Kamoa mine in Africa. Supplies going down. There are supply delays from the South American mines. And, if one of these things were to happen, you'd get a little bit of a hit in the copper price. But when all of these things start to happen and in such close frequency with little visibility exactly as to when those supply streams will come back online in full capacity, that's where I think it's a really good opportunity. I mean, if you're going to be a trader or an investor in the copper space, this is a really interesting time. So A, under investment for a decade. B, these black swan type of supply constraints, and very little visibility on exactly which mine will come on in order to meet the supply constraint. So that's kind of the fun part of being in the copper market.
It's been an interesting time. You mentioned interesting. I'll tag on that, because there's been some bit of fence sitting by those looking forward in terms of the macro direction that they see the geopolitical, the world economy going. For one thing, some are saying, "Oh, we're going to be spinning into a recession." In fact, we already are entering one, and the governments are all cooking the books and measuring things that, like governments debting as a component of GDP, et cetera, that don't reveal the fact that we're already sliding into a recession. And if it is a recession, that means reduced housing starts, and that means reduced copper pipes, that means reduced copper demand, that kind of thing. Other hand say, no, AI data centers are booming and we've got to build out the grid to handle all this stuff. So we have this bipolar forecasting that we've been getting about the overall demand ahead, the road ahead for demand. You described some constraints on the supply that make this an interesting time from the supply side. What about the demand side?
It's, I think, still a little bit of a back of the envelope type of calculation that's going on. But I think fundamentally, when you look at the demand, like where is it coming from? So if we do, in fact, want to have more data centers in the United States, we have to build them out. But it's not just about building a data center. A data center is a series of servers in one centralized location that are just sucking energy. So what does that mean? It means energy infrastructure. And what does energy infrastructure require? Copper wiring in order to transmit. There is a certain amount of fiber optics that's part of that equation, but there is still fundamentally the copper electrical currents are one of the best, and very little, let's call it friction in terms of the transmission. And when you look at the price to actually put in copper cabling versus fiber optics, they're kind of at that similar price where still the copper market or the copper wiring gives you the advantage. So we don't see that necessarily disappearing over the next 5 years. And if we're serious about actually building out infrastructure, we need to do it fast. People are not going to be waiting a decade in order for the AI services to really take off. So if we're looking at AI services to take off within the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, that's copper demand in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years. So what does that mean? Where are you going to get that supply in that short time frame? We're not talking about 20 years out. Okay, we all know that dynamics change over time, but we're talking about the United States giving the message, we want data centers and we want AI infrastructure and we want to be able to expand AI services and we want to be the world's leader. Okay, that's a short time frame. So where's that supply going to come from?
It's not the first time that there's been a apparent disconnect between policy direction saying we want to end up with this result versus the engineering necessities and especially the raw material necessities to make that happen. So to enable that to happen, hopefully this gap will get closed and cooler heads will prevail and things that are rational and make sense about how you get to that goal. Because if the goal is a worthy one, we should do everything we can to get to it. You've also talked to us in the past about strategic partnerships with some major companies, best of breed, to really accelerate and amplify Munduro's results in the area of exploration and development. Most recently, just in the past week, Mundoro announced an expansion of your strategic partnership with BHP, a big name in this space. And can you help people understand in that press release that you just gave, what about it enables this synergy between BHP and Mundoro to amplify the likelihood of Munduro's results of further exploration going forward?
Absolutely. Well, I think this is one of the best ways for our industry to grow, where you have very large organizations like BHP, which is the world's largest diversified miner with a very, very focused portfolio on copper, with small juniors that really have a very strong competitive edge in a specific region where they really understand the geology, the local operations, how to do work in those regions effectively. So when you combine those two, you have very deep pockets in one end, and you have the latest techniques in terms of geoscience that, quite frankly, juniors don't always have access to because it is very expensive, some of those tools and techniques. Now you bring in, let's call it a lot of capital with a lot of tools and techniques and know-how, with a lot of local know-how, understanding how to move rapidly. You bring that together and it's the perfect relationship for real discovery. So we think it's a wonderful way not only to run our business, but for the industry to really rapidly advance how quickly we can make discoveries in copper. And there is just one thing it's, I think, important to tie in. When we're talking about a 5-year time frame, perhaps a typical investor will say, well, that's great, but that means development. It doesn't necessarily mean exploration. The thing is, when those mines go into production or those new assets are developed and go into production, they will be rapidly depleted. And so most organizations do not want their balance sheets and their value going down because of depletion. They need to basically replenish those reserves very, very quickly and rapidly. The pressure to replenish is now there very significantly. So you have strong demand, tight time frame, development projects coming online, and then rapid replenishment of those assets through exploration. And that's how that whole cycle kind of carries through.
It's interesting. You just made me think of an analogy that our viewers would be very familiar with, and that is, as retail buyers of gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and some copper, they've been facing more and more dealers saying, we're out of this, this is not in stock anymore, we have to replenish our inventory. So in the sense, this inventory replenishment, it's like, it's lovely to be able to have things of value, it's lovely to be able to sell them, but you've got to have more acquired, and to source that, this is the big scale. You're talking about much higher on the food chain, which is awesome. Now, that's the next thing I wanted to talk to is about Munduro's role in this whole exciting time and scenario that you just described. Because again, with our rapidly growing subscriber base, many are new here and are meeting you for the first time. So could you refresh our returning subscribers and viewers, but also just illuminate me and our first-time viewers who haven't met you before on what Mundoro specializes in, what makes Mundoro unique and sets it apart and differentiates it from other companies in this space?
That is such a great question. So we are at heart a generator. So what does that mean exactly? Within, you've got your producing mines, you've got your development projects, and then you've got your exploration projects. Within exploration, a project has to come into being. So they need to be generated. And that's where it's at the very early stages of that entire, let's call it cycle. But without actually generating a project, there is no future add-ons. So we all would love to have copper sticking out of the ground. We would all love to walk over it. And particularly if it could be next to the highway and next to the gas station, we're all golden.
I'm gonna sign up for that company. I want that company.
I know,
Yeah.
me too. I'm going to acquire them. So for us, it actually comes down to looking for copper in areas where you know that there is really good fertility in that region, and there is, and by fertility we mean proven systems that are, let's call it good in grade, and I want to say excellent, but you don't always get every single aspect of it. So you want to be in the right region, but you also have to ask yourself, if it was sticking out of the ground, somebody else already has it. So now, where else could it be? Where else could it be underground within a region that has the capacity to really have world-class deposits? And essentially, that's what Mundoro does. We look for those regions, we pick up land packages, we put together the conceptual model of what we think is there, we do the initial scientific work to try and develop and substantiate through evidence what that exploration model is trying to convey, and then we bring in partners. And then those partners bring in the really big capital to test those systems. And ultimately, when you have those two types of groups working together, you should have an expedited exploration discovery cycle. So where are we? Where are those areas? We're in Eastern Europe and Serbia. It's a really important part of Europe and certainly that region on the planet for copper production. It has about 4 discovered porphyry systems, all within 20 kilometers of each other, and a brand new discovery. And that's very rare. And those porphyries are over 1 billion tons. So it is extremely important to have a land package there with real indicators for more discovery. And that's exactly what Mundoro has, and that's why BHP is a partner there on all of our projects. As we move a little bit to the east in Bulgaria, we have another similar region. It's not as big as Timok, but it certainly has world-class production. And there we have JOGMEC as a partner, which is the Japanese government. And then we've done the same thing in the United States, in Arizona. Arizona is actually the world's second richest copper domain on the planet outside of Chile. So if you're going to be in the copper business, you need to be in Arizona. And if you're going to be in Arizona, or if you're going to be in the copper business in more broad terms, you need to be in the porphyry business, because 70% of the world's copper production comes from porphyries. So that's what we do.
That's one thing that Rick Rule has educated our audience about, is the importance of scale. When he says it always draws his attention. You can talk about high concentrations or promising this or that, he says, but you've got to have scale if it's going to really be able to pan out and change the value story of that ownership of that stock. We're going to put a link in the description of this video to Mundoro's homepage. You certainly have some very interesting recent press releases, which you've helped us to understand a little bit more about on some of those. Is there anything else you recommend that either newbies or returning viewers who want to take a second look at Mundoro as potential investors should consider, in addition to visiting your homepage?
Well, look at our valuation. I mean, we are trading at a fraction of what some of our peers are. And I think that's because the market genuinely hasn't understood Eastern Europe. But now with BHP as a partner, this is a fundamental catalyst and change, I think, in the valuation of the company in terms of how much expenditures will happen for a discovery. And once there's a discovery, this model is extremely attractive because you have a very low share count and you have huge upside opportunity to create a discovery with some very big partners.
Well, we're grateful that you stopped by and gave us an update. It certainly reminds me and all of our viewers and subscribers to take a closer look at Mundoro. So folks, look in the description of this video and you'll see the quickest way to get there. Teo Dechev, President and CEO of Mundoro, thank you for joining us again here on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks for having me.